Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show. Go check out some of our past episodes. We got all kinds of great episodes in the archives with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from companies like Netflix and Kinko's and YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Landing Tree, OpenTable, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where I help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And I want to thank my guest here today. His name is Wade Wyant. He's a seasoned entrepreneur, business coach, and now author. His most recent company is called Redegades. It helps families protect their digital privacy and safety. But he's a longtime entrepreneur, longtime coach, and executive advisor, scaling up coach, focusing on mid-market companies as they scale into industry-dominating businesses. He's also been very involved in YPO and EO. We've had lots of great past guests on the show that have been involved in those organizations. He served as president of the EO West Michigan chapter and also in leadership with YPO as well. And one of his past startups was a technology company. He grew from 5 employees in 2006 to over 80 employees and $36 million in revenue in 2017. One of the fastest growing companies in America, 6 years in a row, listing by Inc. 5000. Before we get into this, of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And if you're listening to this and you've ever thought, hey, should I start a podcast? Go to our website, rise25media.com, and you can learn all about how to do that. All right, Wade, such a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to dive in with, I love to ask people about this. You seem like you've been involved in so many different entrepreneurial endeavors and startups, but were you the kind of kid who was just out there hustling? You're out on your parents' lawn doing lemonade stands. You that kind of kid, or did you do it?
Yeah, I was probably not your average hustler. I definitely did it, but those kids who hustled in school and sold things and did that. I was there, but I was always on the technical end and maybe a little naive. So yeah, I did a lot of different things. The classic is the lemonade stand, right? So I lived on a busy road and I had a lemonade stand, and it drove my mom bananas. Because I take all her stuff from the house. I take all the stuff she had for us, not for the lemonade stand. Yeah, all the stuff. So I go out there and I do it, and I always made some good money. But I was technical. I knew how to do it, but I was naive because I remember my mom getting so frustrated. She'd be on the porch watching, and people would stop like in mid traffic to get over and get lemonade from us on this busy street, and it was fun. But then kids would come along and like, oh, how much money have you made? And open up my change drawer, and I didn't see them taking money because I was just, I was one of those kids. So I was always very technical, but I wasn't good at the hustle as much as I was passionate about the hustle. How about that? But then, growing up, I did everything.
You sold baseball cards also?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, we talked about that. I tried. It wasn't online. It was via mail. So it was before online, but I figured out, well, if other people were selling baseball cards, why can't I? And so I started up. I sent flyers to all my friends, and I used my dad's photocopier. He had a meltdown because it was so expensive to photocopy stuff. I'd photocopy stuff and send it to them. And I actually had a couple of friends buy 1 or 2 things, but I really realized very quickly, you have to know what you're doing. And it was one of the first lessons I learned in business, that it's not as easy as it looks. And when you get into it, there's a large learning curve on most businesses. It seems like, oh yeah, I'll just get in, but there's a learning curve to just about everything, and especially being in business.
Yeah. Now it's easy. In my introduction, I was mentioning that you took one business from 5 employees to over 80 employees, 36 million in revenue. It's easy to acknowledge the victories, right?
Yes.
But there's also the struggles. And, in college, you started a couple of businesses. You had an IT services business.
Yep.
And then in the late 90s, you had one that involved the PalmPilot, which was actually kind of ahead of its time. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to own my own business. I knew it. I lived overseas for quite a few years. And when I returned to the US as a late teen, it was just like, I saw all this opportunity. I was kind of like an immigrant, right? Immigrants come here and usually see a lot of opportunity. And so I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and start a business. And the IT startup unfortunately failed, which is okay. It is what it is. And that happens. Learned a lot. The second one was a business where I teamed up with a doctor, and we had this idea in the late 90s when the PalmPilot 5 came out. The processing power on that was enough to support a pretty significant database. So you could sync the database. You had to do it via Cradle, not Wi-Fi at the time, but you could cradle the thing up, sync a good portion of a database, and then take it on the run. And so warehouses used these things like crazy back in the late 90s. It would revolutionize warehousing. So we wanted to take that concept into the hospitals and be able to say, hey, a doctor can go right into the room with this PalmPilot, quickly go have access to way more data than they would in their head. Because back then you had to just know it. You had to have the data available in your head. There's no computer or anything in the room, or you can maybe go research it later, but if the doctor forgot, it was a very kludgy system. If you were in medicine up until the 2000s, very kludgy. So anyways, we put it together, sold it to 2 hospitals. We had these doctors running around with the PalmPilots. It was quite successful. They'd sync and all the data was there. And then we'd have analytics to tell them what to do next. And we got it smarter and smarter. Challenge was you had to convince the doctors, because even though the staff wanted it and the hospital wanted it, it was like, how do you convince these doctors to use the technology? And we didn't think about that. And then the other problem is we were 10 years too early. And you think now, and I followed that industry very closely, you think about now and in 2010, once the Apple iPad came out, that revolutionized that industry because doctors loved it. They forced hospitals to adapt it. And now you got technology in every room, usually a monitor with some type of computer, but the doctors forced hospitals down that path because once it became something they wanted, it was game over. But for me, I was 10 years too early. We had success, but then we rolled all that money into sales and marketing, which was a smart thing to do. If you have something that's going to work, go nuts. And nobody else bought it. I mean, nobody. And we were just sitting there head in hand, like, why don't they get it? And now looking back 20 plus years later, I go, oh, it was almost 25 years later. Well, it's simple. It was just too early to the market. Yeah. And I'm not making excuses. Maybe I could have figured it out. Right. But no, I mean, sometimes you fail and it's out of your control. You just don't have the right product at the right time.
Yeah. Like pets.com, which came along right in the late 90s or something. People made fun of that for years, but there's chewy.com now. I mean, there's all kinds of, select, there's the same thing came along just later.
Mm-hmm. Or one of the biggest companies in America, Amazon, and they got beat up for years and years. Even after the dot-com bust in 2002, people were like, well, is Amazon really going to make it now that this thing's busted? And, Bezos, and love him or hate him, and that team, they had their heads down. They just said, nope, this will be something big. And they were 100% right. Yeah, that's right. So talk a little bit about some of the challenges, the victories for your business as you were growing over the years. So it starts with 5 employees in 2006. Did you acquire the company or did you? Yeah. Well, this is a complicated story, but I love telling it, and because I think it's something everybody can learn from. Again, I was an entrepreneur. I had 2 failures. So I went to my business coach and I said, I was like talking to him, and he's a good friend, still is. He's retired and he's in Florida now, which I'm jealous of him, to be honest with you. I don't say that in a demeaning way. But Ken Vandenberg was my coach, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that gentleman. He poured so much into me and never charged me, and just was an amazing man. So everybody listen to this. If you have any kind of skills, go out and coach and help people. And, whether you make money or not, go help them. And even in my business, I help all kinds of small businesses, and I never get paid for it because I want to pay it back. But anyways,
let me pause on that. How did you get this amazing business coach to work for you for free, or to
he was a professor. He was a retired businessman and one of my professors. And I just liked him, and I synced with him, and I went to him. I just went to him. That's the thing too. People need to know there's so many people who will coach you if you just ask. Jesse Itzler talks about this and other predominant people, but this has been a subject people have talked about for 30, 40 years. I've heard leaders talk about all they did is go ask, and someone did it for him. So I just asked him, and he coached me. And so he basically said to me, he said, Wade, I remember this like it was yesterday. I was talking about my failure and this thing, this pump out thing, it just failed. And I was all discouraged. He said to me, Wade, I think it's time for you to go get a job. And I'm like, what? Like, no, don't say that. And he's like, no, you need to go work for someone who's doing what you want to do. And I'm like, oh man, you're killing me here. So I put my resume out there and I went interviewed several places, got several offers. So I was a technology guy. I had an MCSE. I knew technology very well. And that was huge back in that time period. Still is, but back then it was crazy. They were throwing money at tech like nuts. Anyways, and I went and worked for a guy, Chuck Haggerty, hired me, and I owed this guy a debt of gratitude. One of the best partners I've ever had. He's in my book, Wake Up Call. Anyways, so Chuck hires me, and I get to know his partner, Bob Sweezy, and so Bob and I chatted back and forth about me wanting to be an entrepreneur, and then that was that. So anyways, 2 years later, I went to him and said, I've got an idea. I failed twice. I'd rather build this with you. I'd rather we be partners, split it up, get an equity stake. I'll use your money. So we worked it all out and I grew this business. And that's why I say from 5 people, because the first 5 people I took out of his business and we grew it inside his business. And then if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll see that in 2007, we started a business called ITS Partners. And the reason it was called ITS Partners is because it was me, Chuck, Bob, some other people. We started this partnership and we transferred all the assets over to it. And then I grew that from 2007 till I exited in 2017. And so, I always have a hard time telling people, am I truly an entrepreneur or am I a hired gun? And I'm like, well, I think I have the entrepreneur spirit. I think I've done all the things you need to do. I just found someone to fund my business instead of doing it myself the third time.
Well, that's a brilliant approach. It's kind of I would call it maybe a hybrid approach, right? Yeah. Because you had mentorship, you had a little bit of a safety net, right? You had some guidance.
I did.
But then you also, I imagine, realized some upside potential.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had great upside. I owe those guys for making that possible. I don't know if I would have the same success. I will tell you though, if anybody does it, you'll lay awake at nights going, well, but if I would have just done it myself.
Right. How do you, I guess inevitably what sometimes comes up is, was it equitable the way that you divided up the company?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't comment on that publicly.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges, right? Is like, because the discussion that starts, at the beginning and the discussion that you have later can be very different. Well, let's dive into talking about, let's talk about the book. So Wake Up Call, Insights for Entrepreneurs to Have More Freedom, Reduce Drama, and Scale Their Businesses. First of all, the title, why did you call it the Wake Up Call? And that kind of goes to the entire structure of the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, I hate even saying this, but I probably made more mistakes than I did, successes in my business. And even like, you talked earlier about my exit. It was an okay exit, but it wasn't, I didn't sell for over 100 million, which I would say in today's world, you really want to get your business to over 100 million and then sell. A lot of people exit prior to that. But now that I work with companies, I think if you can't get it to 100 million, then just keep harvesting it, right? Just run it to harvest. And we can talk about that later. But either way, there's a few things I wish I would have done differently. I mean, in many ways. So I sat down and started writing out all these mistakes I made, because I've learned from my mistakes and others' mistakes way more than I've learned from people's success. In fact, a lot of the business that I built, that third business, I watched another business that I was close to, and I just did the opposite of what they did because they were failing miserably. So I just said, they did that. Like, for instance, they would pre-sell services. And I go, well, we're not going to do pre-sell services because that obviously doesn't work. And other things. And sometimes it does work. I'm just giving you an extreme example. So anyhow, I started thinking like, I knew I wanted to write a book. I wanted to tell my story, and it just flowed for me. So I got a writer to work with me, and once a week, no matter what, no matter how busy I was on vacation, no matter what, 1 hour, we would talk and come up with a story. And so if you buy the book, and I hope you do, it's the cheapest thing you can buy from me, by the way. But if you buy the book and you read it, you'll see that it's like 64 chapters. And it's because we wrote over 70 stories. And then I realized that these were all the wake-up calls to me along the way, things I corrected as I went. And so that's where the term comes from. I just these were all wake-up calls for me. And then that played very nicely into what I did next, which is after the book was done, I went through and I wrote a punchy, wake-up call for the very end of the chapter. So every chapter ends with, not the title, like a wake-up call, which may be totally different than the title, maybe similar, but it's this punchy wake-up call, kind of like hitting you in the face. And when people get to know me, that's like my greatest asset and my greatest weakness is I just kind of say what I think. And I'm not real good at being charitable or framing things up. I just tell you what I think. Well, people love that. I get hired for boards all the time because they're like, let's bring Wade in because he'll get the conversation going. He might be wrong, but he'll get it going. So anyways, so the wake-up calls they're not always very charitable. They're kind of in your face. And I might even be wrong, by the way. Read them, send me a note, tweet me what I'm wrong on. Yeah. I'd love to hear it. But anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought it was brilliant. There's some great little tidbits, which we can pick out some of those there. But first, before we get into the individual chapters, you structured it overall with very similar to, and you're a scaling up coach. You mentioned Vern Harnish in the book. Yep. I've got scaling up here. It's always, I joke to people, it's always within arm's reach. So, they organize that as people, strategy, execution, and cash. You've got another one. You got another category, leadership.
Yep. Well, actually, so I owe Vern a huge debt in many ways. I saw him speak in 2004 when I was just kind of getting the business going. And I was with that partner I talked about, and I was running under his business. And he came in and did a one-day seminar. And I'm like, oh my goodness, he knows all the stuff I don't know about my business. And I know all the technical things he doesn't know. So I'll just take all his stuff and make my business better. And we just grew like crazy. So I owe Vern big time. And so, yes, I'm now a scaling up coach and I'm doing something else. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But back to your point of how I structured the book, Vern's concept of people, strategy, execution, cash absolutely works. And I actually expanded cash and I put sales because I think as soon as you talk about cash, you have to address sales. And what I find is most entrepreneurs, they have a lot of voodoo thinking around sales. It's just voodoo sales tactics. And it's not principle or science-based at any level. And so I try to bring some principle proven sales stuff, not, bro science, if you will, what did another entrepreneur tell you? And sorry for the gals out there, ladies, I didn't mean to leave out you. It could be girl science, but I bring this is what you can rely on. And then I added leadership just because, well, not that Vern left that off. I just felt like there were some of the chapters I wrote didn't fall anywhere, but they were clearly on leadership. And I love what the 9 Lies About Work says about leadership and how it's hard to define. So I don't want to pretend like I defined it. I just wrote a few chapters on what I learned about it along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like in the people section, you wrote about a couple of different things, about the importance of not hiring friends, or if you do, having clear rules around them.
Yes.
About family and business. You talk about bunnies in the book, the types of bunnies that work for you. You want to talk about that?
Well, I hope somebody can help me out and they can tell me who came up with this idea so I can give them credit. I desperately want to give some human credit for coming up with this concept because I heard it from another entrepreneur, And once I heard it, I'm like, it's brilliant. But the 2x2 that people always do, like, put a 2x2 up and then place people where they're at based on
quadrants. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Quadrants. Yeah. Based on the trust and based on their performance. And so I laid that out and then someone's like, hey, well, here it is. Top quadrants, your all-star. Well, that makes sense. The far left is terrorists because they perform really, really well, but they're terrible on core values and trust. Bottom is rats because they're just stealing from you. And people don't like to hear that, but that's what it's called. And the final quadrant over here at the bottom, underneath of performance, it's really high trust, really high core values, but they don't have any performance. Well, those are bunnies. And so I've been using this on companies and people are like, this is brilliant. I've worked with some really big companies, like more than 1,000 employees. And they have that in their employee assessments. And they'll talk about it in boardrooms. Like, no, that's a bunny for sure. We love that person, but that's a bunny. They're not performing. We love them. They live our core values. We trust them more than anything in the world, but they're not performing. It's a bunny. So let's find another seat for them, or let's find a way to help them because they're clearly in the wrong seat, which Jim Collins talks about. Anyways, I say all that to say it. That's the concept of bunnies. Please use it. But please, if anybody knows who came up with this, I want to give them credit. I'll cite, them, put them in my book because it's a concept that's just so brilliant. I did not come up with it, but I want to give the person credit who did.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about, so you write about, there's a chapter titled My Guilty Pleasure, and it's about how we're passionate about McDonald's. You were as a kid, still are as an adult. And it's similar to the hedgehog concept, which Jim Collins writes about. But reflecting back on the business that you sold, how did you figure out what that was, what your hedgehog was in the business over the 15 years or so that you built it?
Yeah. So that I'll try to keep it short because we're in podcasts here, not long format.
Yeah. Sum up 15 years in like a minute.
Yeah,
or two.
I'll do it. Well, but it is simple. But it's almost can be disappointing for the listeners. So the idea I had, remember I said I had that idea with my business partner. When we sat down, talked through it, it was basically I had saw technology that someone had developed, but they didn't know how to sell it. They didn't know how to install it. They didn't know how to get it into Fortune 500. And I knew how to do that. And I knew this technology would work because I had worked in some larger companies. And I was like, if they just had this, it solves so many problems. So anyways, I told my partner, I'm like, let's go sell this product. It was basically allowing us to do cybersecurity on any device, anywhere, in any way we wanted to. It was almost like magic at the time. Today, it's not a big deal, but at the time it was magic, almost akin to magic. IT people were like, how are you doing this? Even IT people couldn't believe how we did it. So anyhow, we took that, and our hedgehog was basically, Fortune 500 companies who needed us. Our thing that we loved was controlling computers. We were obnoxious about it. And what we were best in the world was we were best in the world at bringing this software to market and implementing it. Now, so it's a services company, which isn't very sexy, but because it was a sexy piece of software, our hedgehog, and I hate to tell you this as a cop-out, but it was basically this thing called Altiris. It was that technology, and we got some exclusivity on it. And we were able to get to a size where the software vendor almost relied on us. And so for years, we ran that. Well, the problem is when you have a hedgehog dependent on technology and also a software company, you all of a sudden your market could disappear. And so that started to happen to us. So then we switched over and we made the same mistake a second time. We did Symantec, which was a great company until they got sold or bought out. But we
it's all your eggs are in one basket.
Yeah. And so it was great. It was good. The company's still going, by the way. I sold the company. They're now doing ServiceNow. So the third transition. Yeah. ServiceNow probably isn't going anywhere though. They're like SAP. They'll be around forever. But I think they've picked a good horse to run on for 20 years. So I wish them well. And I was part of that transition actually. But I'll say to all entrepreneurs, watch out for that, because you think you got this diamond or a piece of gold, but it gets you, it's like adrenaline. It gets you going for a little bit, but then you can't live on it forever. Right. And there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah. I mean, I've interviewed people on this show that picked the wrong technology, or the technology fell out of fashion, or worse, the parent company killed it or destroyed it either intentionally or not intentionally. How do you avoid that sort of scenario?
Well, I don't know if I have the answer. Sorry, this is embarrassing. I don't know, because those are the kind of things that happen to me. And I battle that. On one sense, it's like, hey, good for you. You started a business. Now you have options, right? And most people don't get that. So I never discourage anybody from starting a business and having some success, because then you can pivot, right? You can make that pivot. How to make that pivot, man, if you could write a book on that, that would be a bestseller. I don't know if anybody's done a good job on identifying the pivot, and that's what you have to do. You get started with one thing, but when it falls through, you have to pivot. Now, thousands, millions of entrepreneurs have pivoted successfully. Thousands and millions have not pivoted successfully. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I could think about it and give a lot of answers, but who knows, right?
Yeah, right. No, that's a tough one. And then I also want to ask you about, so, we're talking about kind of this hedgehog concept that you pick one thing, you put your head down, you focus on that. But we were chatting beforehand about James Cameron. So James Cameron, famous director, he actually wrote 2 of his movies at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Which in a sense,
Rambo and Aliens.
Okay. And in a sense, it's almost like he had 2 hedgehogs, right? Yeah. Like 2. So how do we kind of resolve those 2 things? The idea of you should have one hedgehog and
one focus.
Right.
but for him, and he, you can Google this. Anybody who's listening, he talks about how much success he had doing that. I think this is where sometimes business and business theory runs smack dab into human challenges. And I talk about this in my book, that it's psychological, not logical. And too often as humans, we see ourselves as logical beings because everything around us is logical. This webcast is logical. The device you're watching it on is logical. The room you're in and the heat is logical. Everything's logical. Do this, that's that, and that happens. But humans are almost entirely psychological. We just have moments of logic, but it's all chemical based. It's all just psychological. And so I think like the hedgehog misses the creative possibilities. And so you see plenty of examples of where creative things spin out of companies that were practicing their hedgehog, but gave enough space like Google does and other companies do to allow for that creativity. I think that's what James Cameron was tapping into, that he had all this creativity. And if you only focused on one movie, he'd miss this opportunity. And it actually made both the movies better. Aliens is one of my favorite movies of all times. I can't say Rambo Part 2 is my favorite of all time. It's a good movie for the time, but definitely both blockbusters. And he says, and I believe they made the movies better because he worked on. So back to the core point, I think sometimes in business, we apply logic, which by the way, don't stop. Jim Collins is brilliant, smarter than me for sure. I also think though, sometimes business runs smack dab into human psychology and human performance and human traits that don't always play perfectly. But that said, I still think you should stick with your hedgehog. You can't tell you how many business I told that to.
Yeah. James Cameron is perhaps one of the best directors of all time, most commercially successful. He's been acclaimed. So it's hard to hold yourself up to that standard.
Exactly.
Also, we're running a little short on time, and I want to get to my question asking about my gratitude question. I want to ask about peers and contemporaries that you admire. But before I get to that, you have a long list of books that you admire, authors that you admire in here. One of them is Top Grading, which I'm proud to say is a client of ours, Talent Wins podcast. Nice. Go check it out. Definitely a good one. But I love that you put all those books in there and that you're so, express such gratitude freely to all these different authors. Talk a little bit about the impact that all these different books have had on your career over the years. Yeah.
So I felt like I couldn't write this without doing that because many of the ideas I have aren't unique and they're not, and I didn't come up with them, and they're me learning from other people. And if I didn't recognize that, I literally couldn't live with myself. That was like one of the most important parts of the book. And so, I went through, and I didn't get every book. There's some I probably missed, but Michael Hyatt also did this in his book, The Vision Driven Leader. And when I saw him do it, so I got to give him credit. I probably didn't give him credit. I should do that. Go back and do that.
No, he's in there. You mentioned him.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
but I got the idea from him, right?
Yeah.
The exact idea to list the stuff out. And I just felt like I had to do it. And also gratitude, as you said, and I agree, gratitude is probably the most important thing we can do. And I didn't realize that until the last couple of years. And I'll tell you now, I end almost every quarterly or daily full day engagement with my clients just saying how grateful I am they gave me this opportunity, because they could have picked any coach, anybody to do anybody who buys a book, I'm grateful for it, even though again it's the cheapest thing you can buy for me, so go to Amazon and get it. But I'm grateful. And in my life, I've already talked about Ken Vandenberg. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. I talked about Chuck Hegarty, best partner I've ever had. And, he taught me a lot and it's so important. I'm grateful, obviously, for my parents and all that. I don't mean to sound cliche, but it is a little bit that way. So I'm very grateful, but, I'm grateful for the entrepreneurs like you and others that I've shared, it seems like a lifetime with, of freely exchanging ideas. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here. And that book definitely wouldn't be there. And I guess that brings us full circle to Vern Harnish. Well, he's the thought leader in my space. And, we work together closely. It's a genuine thank you to him. In 2004, if I hadn't seen him speak at the YPOers that brought him to town, hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had the success I had. So, it's full circle. It's everything goes back to people help me. And so I got to make sure I help other people.
And I'm fascinated by that. You mentioned Vern, who I've interviewed a couple of times before. And, it's fascinating to me, people that go from, one day you're in a classroom and you hear someone speak, or you're in a bookstore and you pick up a book, and then that has a massive impact on your life. And then flash forward years later and you have a relationship with that person, or you, in your case, become a certified scaling up coach and actually implement this, this framework, which had such a big impact on you. So talk a little bit more about what that's like to come full circle.
Well, it's really cool. Vern's sold over 500,000 of copies of Scaling Up, and 500,000 of his Rockefeller Habits. He's spoken everywhere, and so it's really cool. But beyond being cool, it's rewarding as well, and sometimes a little surreal. But it's also, Vern's like any of us. I spent a lot of time with Vern. We've done courses together. I've helped him in Vegas when he does his 2 or 3 day workshop, and sign up for them if you can. They're amazing. You will come back. Your business will do. You go to Vern's 2-day, 3-day workshop, you will come back and do better in your business. I promise you that.
Yeah. And anyways, I know he and Bill Gallagher, another scaling up coach, are doing one in Lake Tahoe, I believe in April of this year, 2020.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Gotta go. But what I was going to say about Vern is one of the things that Vern taught me, and I don't know how he does it. I'm going to tell you, that guy responds to, as much as busy as he is, he responds to email almost instantly. For example, when I need my book endorsed, I emailed him 2 hours later. He emailed me back. Of course, I sent him the book. He read the book. The guy reads like crazy. I mean, he reads probably more than anybody I know, and gave me an endorsement. I mean, within minutes. And there's people I email that don't respond back for days and days, and they don't have anywhere near the connections that Vern has. So, and he does that with everybody. So it's pretty incredible. And I don't mean to gush about Vern, but no but about it. I don't mean to gush about him. It's just hard not to, because there's some things he's done that are pretty incredible.
Yeah. And then, so wrapping things up. So you mentioned it earlier. I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of, looking around at your peers and contemporaries, others in your industry, however you want to define that, and just, thanking them publicly. So, who of your peers and contemporaries, you've been active in YPO, you've been active in EO, cybersecurity, who would you acknowledge? Who would you want to call?
I'll do like 2 or 3 people. One person's never been acknowledged, and I'm just thinking about it right now, because you kind of spurred some words that made me think about this. There's the gentleman called Dan Beam. He started a business called OST, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he started his business a few years before me, and then I was always a few years ahead in size and everything else. And he did very well. He grew that business bigger than mine, and he was always very generous with his time. About twice a year, I'd email him and say, "Hey, I need another little coaching session." And I go to his office, and he would basically tell me what was going to happen in 2 to 3 years, because he was 2 or 3 years ahead of me. We were slight competitors, but he just openly, freely gave it to me. And so, I'm so grateful for his time, and I've never publicly thanked him, not on purpose. It just hasn't come to mind. If it wasn't for that'd be huge. And then a good friend who's been there through was at Symantec, and I hired him at ITS, and then we've been friends since then, and we've collaborated on many things. His name's Matt Reed, and he's been a really good friend to me in business and in personal life. And I'm grateful for him. I do recognize him in the book, but you think about people who came in on my life, not just one stage, but multiple stages of my life, and really, really helpful. And then, of course, all the people I've already said. And it could go on. How long is this podcast? It can keep going on all day.
Eventually the orchestra comes up and kind of just starts playing, and you
the mic drops on me.
Exactly. Right. But you said in the book, you actually referenced a bunch of them. So that's great. So, all right. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much, Wade. Wake Up Call is the name of the book. Mention where people can go check it out, and also where people can connect with you.
Amazon. I made a decision. So again, being an entrepreneur, being a coach, going a business, I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Everybody has an Amazon account, or at least everybody I want to sell to. Let's just make this easy. There's only one place. Just go to Amazon. You can't even buy it from me. You can buy it from Amazon. That's it.
That's great. Yeah. Wade, thanks so much. And good talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let me be a part of this.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.